So hello everyone and welcome to Nikky Lyle Creative Presents with Industry Leaders, where today I'm joined by Ben Davies. So Ben is co-founder of The Neighbourhood and non-exec director of Hayes Davidson, and he's also an industry mentor for creative businesses. Welcome Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. And hello everybody. Thanks for inviting me, Nikki. Welcome to my spare room. So I'm just really keen to answer questions as well today. I know we'll just have a bit of a chat, but if there's anything that I don't get to, just give me a shout afterwards. You can find me on LinkedIn, those sorts of places, but LinkedIn's probably the easiest.
Well, that's great to know that's a place people can reach out to you as well. How we're going to structure this so everybody knows is I've got a series of questions for Ben. So, all right, here we go. Let's dive in, shall we? So what about visualization first appealed to you, Ben? Because I know you initially went to university to study to become an architect, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. I think I have to go back a bit further to answer this question, actually, which is just to like my childhood. You know, I grew up with two older sisters. One was an artist, one was an engineer. So, you know, sort of kind of on the creative and science end of the spectrum, if you like. And I guess I sort of grew up in that environment, saw those two things and charted a course straight down the middle. So I was really into kind of design and graphics, but also getting things done. And when I was growing up, there was just new worlds opening up in terms of technology and creation. I remember being absolutely obsessed by kind of TV idents and that sort of stuff, you know, animation, and just the idea that you could create any worlds that you wanted to create yourself. But then I'd sort of get a bit serious, I suppose, and try and choose a career. People tell you need a career. And I took a bit of advice, really. And architecture just came up, and to a degree of being like the ultimate art form, I suppose. You know, did the whole course at university, kind of 7 years altogether, and then at the end, sort of came out and said, I don't want to be an architect, at least not in the traditional sense, anyway. A lot of people I knew were saying the world was quite a different place when you were qualified, and I guess I didn't want that just yet. So I got really into sort of CGI and visualization during that little journey. It was all taking shape, and I liked the appeal of doing projects that pretty much you could do in an afternoon or in a few weeks rather than a few years. Architecture is like a slow business. That was probably it, really. My short attention span got me into architecture and then back out of it again.
Yeah, that happens a lot, actually, where people start training to become architects and then fall into the arch viz world. So did you start out in 2000 in the industry?
Something like that, yeah, mid-90s, I think. You know, I don't even know if it was you could call it an industry then. There was probably, I guess, 2, 3, 4 kind of what you might call serious companies doing what is now known as ArchViz, one way or another. So as I was doing that 7 years at uni, I got a job at Hayes Davidson in London, which was probably the main trailblazer, if you like, of the industry. Founding fathers, you know, someone called them recently. So I kind of got diverted into that on route. But it was very small, as I say. Wouldn't really call it an industry. It was a bit more like a cult, I think, at that moment.
Yeah, I always imagine what was the industry like back then compared to now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say immature, you know, and non-existent. Like I say, just kind of 2 or 3 companies, each spotting an opportunity and leading with passion and just creating stuff and spotting an opportunity. And that's sort of how it emerged. And the computing technology was only really starting to come to the fore to allow you to do that in technological ways rather than, you know, watercolors would always be the go-to art form before that. So
And what software were you using back then in the early days?
Well, software-wise, it was pretty similar, actually, in a lot of ways. Not everything's changed, but nothing's changed. It was 3D Studio. I think they'd just come out with a 3D Studio Max, this shiny new thing at that point. Using AutoCAD a lot because it's just more accurate, and Photoshop. You know, that was it really. Those those three pieces of software. So, like I say, a lot's changed, but nothing's changed.
Yeah, that is very interesting, actually. So it was 3ds Max came out, and as you said, not much has really changed over the years. So okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is obviously a lot has changed, but you know, there was feels like it's a much more technical, can be a lot more technical pursuit now. You know, the technology, as I say, didn't really exist then. You had to just paint it. You know, you could get so far with, say, a render, which would, by modern standards, look pretty awful, and then just try and paint it to make it look beautiful.
Yeah.
And I guess a big change along the way was actually when Photoshop introduced an undo function that could go beyond one undo. So yeah, you're able to get some of that time back. I guess what also has changed maybe a lot is that there's a lot more resources now than there were then. You know, basically, if you needed something, then, you know, 20 years ago you had to just make it. You couldn't really find resources that you would need typically, or very, very few anyway. So you became very resourceful, would be one word I would use.
And what was the timeline of your career that then led to you setting up the neighbourhood?
Well, yeah, I left uni in 2000, I think, yeah, and I'd already had a year or so at Hayes Davidson before then. Yeah, and I guess at that point, I always had a burning desire. I didn't quite know what to do with it, but a desire to do my own thing, or to, you know, to not work for somebody. A kind of combination of confidence and misplaced kind of arrogance, I suppose, and control freakery, all those things. So I set up sort of freelance at the beginning and worked for a couple more studios that arrived on the scene. I was just like working for the visualization studios myself. And then a few people I knew had left Hayes Davidson, and a few others had to this new startup called Smooth, and they offered me a job in London, but I didn't want to go to London. I'd spent a couple of years there, and I'm like, no, I fancy staying up north in Manchester. And rather than, you know, well, we just came up between us, why don't we just set up in Manchester? So we did. It was just dead straightforward. I remember driving up the M6 with a computer in my car, and that was it. Yeah, so I set up a studio for Smooth, and I was pretty autonomous there, really, and built a little team there. Really proud of a lot of the work that we did. Still know a lot of those guys now to this day, who've gone on to make other studios themselves. Yeah, we grew that to like 12 people. That was around 2005, 2006. But I always still had this itch to scratch, I suppose. You know, I had a lot of autonomy, and I'd learned an awful lot about what I thought was good, what I thought could be better, and really just wanted to set up this place that I had in my head. And I always thought of it as a place rather than a company or a business. You know, it's a creative place where sort of ideas can flourish and people can do their best work. Sounds quite cliched now, I suppose, but that was it. That was the vision. I could sort of see it rather than, you know, spreadsheet it. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I did. I just set up with a few folks who came with me from Smooth, and just had this idea to set up a more kind of cross-discipline creative space, I suppose. Visualization as a core component, but just being much more open to how else we could tell stories. And we had a phrase for that at the outset called building worlds and telling stories, which summed up my personal and our collective kind of enthusiasm quite well.
Yeah, that's great. And so what first steps did you take in setting up the neighbourhood? So you got
yeah, first steps were, I guess, a little bit of planning. You know, there was a plan to be hatched, if you like, but first step was to leave job, you know, and to take the plunge. Me and my friends John and Tim and another John, we'd saved a few grand each, actually, and we took out a little bank loan. Well, say little, it was 25 grand, which was a lot at the time, and you know, a lot now. But yeah, just chucked everything all in together. Bought a few computers, some software, some desks. I remember our chairs cost £6. They were from IKEA, kind of plastic chairs, and yeah, sort of like the essentials really. And we all committed together to saying, right, to give this a chance, we're gonna say we don't need any money for 6 months. We're all committed to working for 6 months at this to try and get it out of the starting blocks, and to make our own work, make our own space, make our own way in the world, our own identity, and not necessarily do kind of commercial work, but just make stuff. I also had a few contacts from over the years, and but we pretty much did that. We just got on with making stuff, but then the phone rang and we started doing some real work as well. And before I knew it, we were underway. Yeah, so I was like the de facto MD. I suppose we all had roles, notional roles, although of course everybody's mucking and doing everything. But I was doing everything as you'd expect. I've read a lot of books, as you might see on behind me. I've read most of them, and I thought the answer was in a book somewhere. I thought, a lot of people have done this. The answer will be there somewhere. And I just remember one line in particular saying, "Okay, if you're a founder of a business, 1 minute you'll be working on your 5-year strategy or whatever. The next minute you will be having a argument with a toilet roll supplier." And sort of, I thought that just summed it up quite nicely. And that's pretty much how it was for certainly the first few years before we got a bit more scale and we could grow.
So how long did it take from the initial, all of you getting together, sitting on your plastic IKEA chairs, and then the business started to slowly take off a little bit more?
Well, like I said, it did actually take off really quite quickly because, we hadn't really taken into account that people would just want to work with us, from previous reputation and previous relationships, not just in the places that we'd worked, but just in life. And yeah, when people said, we've got this project, do you want to work on it? It felt really, reckless to say no. So actually, we were quite fortunate. We were, within a couple of years, there was about 8 of us, I think, and maybe 12 a year after that. But it was quite considered growth. But sort of like once you press the start button, it's like you're up and running, you're off, and kind of strap yourself in and hold on to an extent.
Yeah, definitely. So your mantra was, do great work and the business will grow. So could you talk to me a bit more about how you lived through that mantra with growing the neighbourhood and the business?
Yeah. And I think this is actually, a really important philosophy, perhaps, for a lot of not just creative companies, actually, but especially creative companies. And for me, that was always about the order in which you think of things, because in business, it's natural, of course, to obsess about money. Without it, you don't have a business. It's sort of in the definition, isn't it? But for me, it was never that first. It was always about creating this place where you can just do amazing work, where people could do hopefully the work of their lives. And I just thought, if that happens, there is value in that. If people are doing amazing work, then people will pay for it, because it will be amazing, and people like amazing things and are prepared to pay for them. So it just became a mission, really, I suppose. Never really kind of a formalized one, but certainly a driving force. So yeah, I think manifests in a couple of ways, actually, in a business as it grows. The first was really, pay attention to the work first and foremost all the time. As I said, as soon as you just start focusing on the numbers, that starts to really affect your decision making, I think, and your priorities. And if your priority as a creative company is to do amazing work, without that, you're sort of on the way out. So yeah, focus on that determinedly, and that requires investing in it, investing in creating the conditions where that can happen, investing in play, investigating in exploration, and not trying to rationalize every experiment with what we might be able to sell. Just naturally feed off the creative energy that creates, that is quite compelling for clients as well as for people to join as team members. And yeah, to as much as you can, and invest in the people, because it's nothing without the people. And that, that was my driving force from the start, to try and build a culture rather than a company. And I think for a while it was amazing for most of it, actually. And I think if you do all those things to an extent, and you obviously you've got to have some viable commercial model behind it. If you're doing all that and not getting any bills out the door at the right kind of rate, then it's not going to work. So you do need like a hard underbelly, I think might be a good way to put it. But if you do all the things above and you have a sensible framework, it should just sort of wash through. So it's quite I'd like to think it's a relatively smart, sensible business strategy, actually.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like any kind of business book you read or podcast you listen to, they all say just find your purpose, go at it with passion and conviction, and the money will come. And I think if you just focus on the money and the bottom line, and you're not focusing on what are you putting out there in the world, what's going to then draw money to you, then you're just always going to be broke, worrying about money all the time. You've got to really focus on.
Totally. And you'll make decisions that are decisions about money rather than decisions about what you're actually selling and what you're trying to sell and what fires you up.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't fire you up, it's sure as hell not going to fire someone else up. So, yeah.
I think that's when people are looking for jobs as well. They look for a home, somewhere they can grow. And that's what I really enjoyed about working with you as well, Ben, from the recruitment side, is I knew that someone would go for an interview and they'd be absolutely buzzing and they'd say, oh my God, I want to work at the neighbourhood, because they bought into the work and the culture and the vision and things like that. And yeah, so you managed to create the neighbourhood into an award-winning industry success, and then you closed it down. And I'd like to get to that point and maybe ask you what happened there, what was going through your mind, what was the decision behind it, etc.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean it's a very juicy question.
Yeah.
Look, and it was a 10, 11, 12-year journey, actually, and it's hard to answer in a very sort of brief and do it justice, but I'll, definitely want to spend a little bit of time going into that. I think people are always looking for like a headline, oh, they must have fallen out, must have gone bust, must have been something catastrophic must have happened. And I guess if there is a headline, it's sort of like health, actually. It's about, health and well-being, but it's incredibly nuanced. So I think it's worth, particularly in these times, just trying to explain some of that, not for my benefit, but for people to maybe think about situations in their lives, because I know I've spoken to loads of people since made this decision, and found it quite helpful. So I could probably spend an hour or a day just talking about this one question. So you'll have to just shut me up if I ramble on. But I think I just want to get to like a couple of key things that really went into that. And to start with, just this whole idea of like leading and starting something is actually hard.
Yeah.
It's very glamorized, this kind of leadership. Founder. But it's tough. If you want to do something with impact and meaning, which I certainly did, and you're learning everything on the job. Of course, books and advisors can prime and help you, and I've had my share of those, as you can see. But there aren't actually really any shortcuts. You have to feel it yourself. You have to mess a few things up. But there's a lot of self-doubt on that journey, a lot of personal challenge, as well as just the pragmatics of a business. But I guess in the business, there was, a lot of ups and downs, roller coaster. We were like 4 people at one point, we were over 40 people at another point, and then we were 2 people right at the end. So, quite a roller coaster, Big Dipper. But during that journey, things change in life as well, don't they? Things change. I'd become a dad. I'd got older, and just built my level of self-understanding and my understanding more deeply my purpose, I suppose, you know, and that changes, that can change over time. And the business itself was a roller coaster, as I say. And the thing about roller coasters, when you're on them for a long time, you start to feel sick. And that's quite a good analogy, I think. And the machinery, if you like, of trying to run a business versus this wonderful sort of creative shop really started to hurt, actually, I guess, personally. And there were a couple of things, you know, in the latter years, you know, we'd set about, you know, fulfilling a vision on a couple of different ways. And we had a lot of growing pains, you know, a lot along the way. There was a particular phase where, you know, I was very clear, or I thought I was clear about a vision, but it turned out maybe I wasn't, or I wasn't believing it myself. And we had a lot of challenges with, you know, bringing new people in, and the place, the vibe changing, and a few good people left, and it was just all really choppy. And we sort of had the ingredients, I would say, but we didn't have the quite the right recipe in those kind of last few years in particular. And that just led to what I would describe as a lot of bruises for me personally. You know, you take all that personally when it's the thing that you're trying to lead or co-lead. And I had a lot of bruises. I think, you know, to an extent, I sort of lost my purpose. I'd lost my mojo a bit. And yeah, it was definitely harder to get it to work. It's sort of counterintuitive, but you sort of feel as you grow, you can do more things. But in some ways, it sort of felt that we could do fewer things, and the work was getting less good. We were getting less focused. And I just had this nagging feeling, I guess, underlying all things when I started to probe into it, that we'd had our time in the spotlight, sort of thing. We'd done our best work, and that it was maybe behind us, not ahead of us. And that was a really hard thing to sort of question in your own mind. And notwithstanding, you know, I was a pretty new dad and all that comes with that, and I was absolutely exhausted, physically, mentally, jaded, and you can't lead when you're in that position, actually. So yeah, just had to ask myself those really difficult questions. Is this what I want anymore? And you never really ask the questions about yourself, I think, as a leader. A lot of the time it's always about everybody else. You know, it's about the team, it's about the next thing for them. And for us, very rarely kind of look inwards a little bit more. So I did a lot of that. And yeah, it just came to a point with you know, John, my business partner, still really good friends now. You know, sort of opened a door to a conversation to say, I'm just really spent. I think I need to make a change. How are you feeling? And it turned out that, yeah, he was in not too dissimilar a spot, actually. So yeah, that was quite a profound moment where we just said, maybe we need to make a change. And it just turned out through some really quick, deep soul searching that the most authentic, graceful thing to do was to close, rather than to, you know, it's not really a scenario you hear about much in business. People usually kind of build and sell or go spectacularly bust, or you know, but to just go, you know, no, we're just going to try and gently stop. But of course, that decision affected everybody else. There was over 25 people, I think, in the team at that time. So, but you know, it was like the first truly selfish decision that I think I'd made in, you know, 10 years or more. And I knew that I couldn't lead it into the phase that it needed to go into any longer. So I needed to change and stop. And the best thing to do was to stop. So it was a horrible, difficult, challenging decision. No, and it's horrible that it's binary. It ends up being like a yes or no. You can't have like an in between. Yeah. Or in between is the route to a bit more pain, actually. So, but I'm so proud of what we did there. We, you know, had such a great set of people who, you know, I continue to be told that it was the best place people have worked. Just last week, someone else told me again. It was just, and you know, lots of friendships and other great things that have now come out of that whole team. And I've learned so much about not just business, but about myself. And if I can take that now into the world next, maybe this was, you know, I started thinking of the neighbourhood as my life's mission, but it ended up thinking, well, maybe that was chapter one. You know.
Yeah, definitely. And what you achieved with the neighbourhood was incredible. And I remember I heard about you guys for years before I even worked with you, and I was just astonished by the kind of talent and the creatives that you did nurture and that you built, and even like junior level visualizers or middleweights, and the quality of the work that they were producing all under your leadership. And you create this business and this vision, but also you're a human, and if it's not quite working for you anymore in the way that it was, there's something quite, you know, brave about saying, okay, line under the sand, we've achieved what we wanted to, let's end this chapter, as you say, and then start a new one, because you're still very much involved in the industry. And I know you used to like mentor, and you're a business consultant at other studios, etc. So my next set of questions, Ben, is more just advice now for
Yeah.
okay. So whenever you were hiring for people for the neighbourhood, what key things do you look for in a visualizer to take them on?
Well, I think, you know, first and foremost, I think, again, it's something people say a lot these days, but it's like you hire the person, not the role, or hire the person, not the skills. You know, we always thought that the four of us together at the outset were like, we can teach skills. You know, you can't teach the outlook or the mindset, the person. So we would just look for absolute, like, just enthusiasm, people who want to plus things, not minus things. You know, they just like latch onto things and plus them, that maybe they've got, they think a bit differently, you know, in some way, than you know, they don't fit the mold necessarily, and they're prepared to just try things and do things and experiment. Yeah, so there's the, you know, I guess within that is sort of like questioning and curiosity are just the root of all creativity, I think, at the end of the day. So it's also so much about what questions people are harboring, which you know, fuels that curiosity and that enthusiasm to have burning questions all the time.
Yes.
So yeah, it's less about, you know, of course we're looking for, you know, someone who's got a certain set of visual apparatus, I suppose, you know, a sense of light and shadow and composition, and, you know, but like I say, those things can develop. We're just always just looking for the spark and the human, as much as the function and the role. Okay,
so that's quite interesting. So the skills would need to be there, obviously, but then it was the potential actually, and the plus how they could grow and develop. And that is quite important within a business. It's the energy that someone's going to bring as well, and enthusiasm.
And that can represent in loads of different ways, right? It's not, that doesn't mean everyone has to be like jumping on the table, banging the drum, shouting enthusiastically. You know, that can come across incredibly quietly and thoughtfully. And, you know, so it's like, but spending time to just try and understand the person and what fires them up, so that you can understand if you can help each other. And it's going to be a mutual opportunity for growth, not just, as I say, just like a function or a role.
And what type of portfolios do you like to see? Websites or PDFs, or do you have a preference?
No. what I like to see most of all is sort of something different, actually. I know, you know, people might say, oh, we need a PDF and no more than 3 megabytes or whatever. But I like to see people who sort of ignore those rules, or do that and then do something else as well. But show something of you. Don't just show what you think you should show. You know, I got a little, you know, certainly get a bit tired of seeing PDFs with essentially the same kind of imaging all the time, for example, with a CGI artist, and no sense of who's this person, what fires them up, what do they do in their spare time when they're not trying to learn these tools, what do they, who's the person, and what ideas have they got, what itches are they scratching? You know, so show me the human as well as, and if if that can happen in a PDF, then great, but it might happen better in I don't know, a voice message or a, a painting. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. So one bit of portfolio advice would be not to have the same image throughout, maybe have some kind of variety, something that injects a bit more.
Yeah, I would say don't like I say, don't just do what people expect you to do. What you think the industry wants from you. People at the end of the day want great people who've got great ideas and can, want to go further. And you have to sort of put yourself out there a little bit to show some of that and be vulnerable. So it's like show something that is a really scrappy idea that it looks awful, but it's like, it's something you're trying to do. It's a pursuit. Yeah, and don't. I'd also say sort of like don't wait to be asked. Don't wait for like a company to be advertising if you want to go and work there. Or we hardly ever advertised. Actually, we mostly took on people who just sent something really compelling through that meant that I had to get in touch. Quite often we weren't even looking, but you spot someone who's just like got so much about them that you're like, you need to come and work here. We need to work together.
Yeah, definitely. I think that can be quite common actually. If you come across someone that is incredibly interesting, that's approached you, it's always a good sign because it shows that they're interested in your company and they want to work for you. And I guess with certain businesses of the size, you can accommodate a new hire if someone's exceptional and you don't want to miss out on.
Yeah, I think most businesses can if they're honest. It depends on your culture, but if the costs aren't particularly high in the grand scheme of things, to take a chance on somebody for a little while, see if it works out. What's the worst that can happen?
And what advice would you give to any junior visualizers out there that are just starting to enter the industry?
Well, I think maybe building on that last point, actually try and get in somewhere, and you might have to make some sort of sacrifices to do that, if you like. Recognize that there aren't, if you're just starting out, there aren't that many shortcuts. Actually, not. I know that in this age we're often obsessed with hacks or shortcuts. You have to build this, build the skills, build the outlook, build the opinion, build your point of view out. And I guess, when I left university, for example, I left it and came out straight out into a recession. There were hardly any jobs, and I managed to get a job, thankfully. But I spent all my spare time just working away at what I thought about all this stuff and ploughing it into my own kind of work. And then it was those things, actually, a year or so later, as the recession started to, more opportunities started to arise. It was those things that I'd been doing that got me into other places. So yeah, just like I say, focus on trying to forge your own path, forge your own opinion, and put yourself in a place to do that. Sometimes you need to be a bit bolshy. Actually, I remember there's a great guy. I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but early days at the neighbourhood, had a phone call from this guy Stu, who was basically he said, just picked up the phone and heard this voice going, "Yeah, hi, is that Ben? Yeah, I'm outside. Can I come and show you my work?" And I was like, "Oh." Bit taken aback. I'm like, I'm just a bit busy at the moment. He's like, "No, I really need to show you my work. I want you to see it." And I was like, "What? Okay, come on up." And he came in and he showed me just, he was really kind of early days in his work. He showed me this beautiful little thing that he'd laboured over at home, been crafting, of a building in Manchester exploding into a flock of birds and flying away. And then more than that, though, I was enchanted by that, but I was enchanted by his attitude and this just kind of, I want to work here. I'll do whatever you want me to. Can I just come here? And by the end of the afternoon, I was just like turning around to everybody, going, "We've found our next." It was one of our first team hires, actually. Wow. It just, so don't be afraid. Like I say, that's a bit of a recurring theme there, isn't there? To put yourself out there and put your style, your mark out there, but that doesn't have to be, as I say, sort of extroverted. That can be really thoughtful and considered as well. Yeah.
I think a lot of it is like grit and resilience. And I know when I first started out in recruitment, it wasn't long after the recession, and it was real hard work. But I remember working like the longest hours and pushing. And then after a while, the bad times do ease off a little bit, and then things do start to improve. So that's a key message for juniors, is just,
yeah, I guess,
put yourself out there. And
yeah, another part of that, actually, if you're thinking about juniors, is again, don't just follow the same people that everybody else is following. It's particularly easy now, in the world of Instagram and 24-hour, on tap image feeds. Not you can end up in the same sort of echo chamber. I think where truly unique work comes is when you take things from completely otherworldly places, other industries, other influences, other ideas, and you latch onto them and you bring them into this one or into a different one, and you just start messing around. That's where, kind of, for me, looking out and bringing things in can be a huge sort of way of standing out if you are starting out.
And is there any advice that you wish someone had given you earlier on in your career? Any kind of pearls of wisdom you'd like to pass on?
Don't know, really. No, I think just trust yourself. Don't feel, there's a theme building here, isn't there? But and don't let sort of high standards get in the way. The industry is very much about creating perfection a lot of the time. But yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect, and it won't be quite a lot of the time. So, just be really open and collaborative, and never stop learning. Always be open. Never think you know it all, because you sure as hell don't. Yeah.
And so, how are you finding lockdown at the moment, and what's the effect that you've seen that it's had on the industry currently?
Well, certainly the companies that I know about and the ones that I work with, there's been a sort of dramatic pause, if you like, and some of that self-induced, just like kind of an oh fuck moment. What is everything about to stop? Yeah, but I think broadly speaking, it seems that a lot of the world has been on a bit of a pause briefly, and now a lot of people are kind of going, well, we can't just sit in pause forever. Let's make some quick decisions and move on. Keep moving, keep going. And yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. It's going to be a really, really bumpy period of time, absolutely no doubt, and there's going to be some really challenging times for everybody in every industry. But yeah, I think I've worked through a couple of recessions now, so I'm quite sort of, albeit this one's a completely different. I'm assuming we are going into recession, but this one is a completely different animal again. But there's no doubt that doing things of worth, that are great quality, that people need, has a market. Might be a slightly smaller market in the short term, but it will grow and flourish again. And if you can take this time to reflect a little bit, use it as an opportunity to regroup if you can, if your circumstances allow, then yeah, I'd really encourage that.
Yeah, I think if anyone can upskill, experiment with different technology, and do a bit of research in different ways of working, etc., to then re-enter back into the industry with a fresh set of eyes, might be quite helpful as well. And I know that I've been told by a couple of accountants it's been like a sharp drop, but it's going to be a sharp kind of bounce back as well. Do you think that might be the case in this instance? And it's weird, isn't it? Because the pause button's been pressed, but we don't know what sort of recession we might be entering, but we do know we'll be entering a sort of recession.
I don't know, and it's so hard to be in any way generalised about it, because I think the reality is the circumstances are so different on every individual and every company basis of who their clients are, who they work with. So many factors make a very individual picture. So, you know, that there will obviously just be a shrinking, a contraction of sorts. But as you say, there will be, we will, and are starting to come out of this, I would say, already in one form or another. And that is also bringing some huge positives. People realizing whole swathes of an industry are now opening up that people didn't really think was there. And if you're working on a certain, I don't know, technology platform, suddenly that's booming. Like, take the platform we're talking on at the moment, you know.
Yeah.
Most of the world hadn't heard of Zoom, you know, 3 months ago, and here they are, and it's everybody's using it. And the same goes in out. I guess the point I'm clumsily trying to make is that out of there is always an upside. You sometimes just have to look really hard for it.
Yeah, I know Zoom, I heard of a situation where they'd done a system update because obviously they'd been overloaded on the network, and they all went to sleep in California or wherever, and then there were people in London trying to run all their Zoom calls and they couldn't log in. So that was one glitch.
Right.
With that rapid development of current times, isn't it? And trying to...
Yeah, totally. And I think, you know, I think hopefully a lot of people are basically just being a bit more forgiving with the world right now, and being more, I don't know, just more human, more understanding, more flexible, more empathic, you know, all these sorts of qualities that maybe historically haven't come into business speak too much, you know, are coming in a bit more now.
Yeah, definitely. And do you have any predictions of what the future of visualization is going to look like in our post-lockdown world? Because I don't want to say COVID-19, because it looks like we're going to be living with this actually for quite a while. But post-lockdown, what do you think the industry will be like?
I don't know is probably a good answer. An honest one. I think clearly there's loads of opportunities right now, in just circumstantial, if you like. People can't move around so freely, so sales suites and things like that, a lot of people who work for those kind of environments, you know, that has to change and evolve quite quickly. Technology platforms where people can interrogate environments and see beautiful work, and that being very easy and graceful to do will be, you know, is already a big thing. I think will become bigger. But I think for me, you know, coming back to some earlier themes, really, it's like coming back to what actually is this art form. It's like a storytelling art form, and going back to the power of telling stories and thinking about it that way around. How do I tell better stories in this new environment versus the old way?
Yeah.
That might unlock some of where it's going a little bit more, rather than just kind of going, you know, what's the technology, what's the platform, what's next? Good stories always, you know, carry, I think.
Yeah, it'd be quite interesting to see, as you say, what sort of visuals people are creating, considering the storytelling of this new post-lockdown world. Because I know like things like wayfinding and signage systems are going to be changing, because the whole navigation of humans in buildings and spaces, and I know like WeWork, etc., are looking at like desk spacing and stuff like that. So what do you think visualizers can do at the moment at this time? Obviously upskilling with different software, but as you said, looking into the storytelling, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you can, and look, I appreciate as much as anybody that, you know, everyone's got their own challenges, whether it's around homeschooling or as I'm trying to do at the moment, or very urgent need to earn money and all the rest of it. It gives a real opportunity to just sort of ask those difficult questions of yourself. I think, what is it that appeals about this, and look about this work, about this space, because that's where, you know, coming back to some of the reasons I set up the neighborhood with John and Tim, was it's like, it's from the heart, it's not like worked out in your head. It's like you feel it. So sort of follow your gut feeling and trust that a bit more. And I think one thing that definitely is true with the industry now, is it's obviously huge now compared to, and continues to be, is that there is an opportunity, however sort of niche, if you like, your style or your outlook or the type of people you want to work with or the type of project you want to do. There is a niche available, or a niche of a niche, to do that, and to either do it on your own or even build a whole business around that niche. You see quite a few successful studios now doing just that, around an attitude or a style. So come back to those kind of first principles really, and think about what you love, why you love it.
I think there's been some debate about how visualization studios in some instances might be able to cut the architects out of the whole process of creating buildings and environments. What are your thoughts on that?
Cut the architects out. Tricky one.
Yeah.
Obviously having been through 7 years of university and then still knowing that I'm not even a junior architect, there is an awful lot of skill that goes into that role that a lot of people don't really fully appreciate. It's and I think the visualizer, if you like, can just be it's not about replacing, it's not about either or, it's about how they collaborate, how they work together, sometimes about how they are the same person or the same team, but certainly how you can become like the left and right hand sometimes. I think where it's worked, where I've seen great project success in times over the years, is when you almost become like the paintbrush for the architect's brain, and actually in that space something gets plussed, some new things come up that wouldn't have happened from a straight kind of draw this for me kind of metaphor. So I think it's much more about how you can work together and build on each other's unique capabilities rather than either or. Yeah.
And so my last question, Ben, because I want to allow for a bit of time for people to ask questions in the little Q&A box. So what have you taken from this pandemic and being in lockdown that you'll be taking into the new world people keep saying that we'll be creating after this?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've probably already touched on a few of these themes, but just a huge opportunity that maybe had to be such a radical shift in everybody's outlook. No one would have done this by design, but in some ways maybe it gives a lot of people a spark to change things that aren't right, whether it's in their lives or in their work. And so to, not go into some huge navel gazing exercise, although that opportunity does exist, but to truly come back to what is important, what is actually important. And obviously with my journey through the neighbourhood that I was going through earlier, I hit quite a few of those questions a few years ago, actually. So I'm a bit sort of, not blasé, but I'm sort of built up a lot of resilience to I'm not saying I was ready for this at all, certainly wasn't. And I've been enormously anxious like everybody and continue to be. But I'm also really optimistic.
Yeah.
That a lot of good comes out of this. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if that's a good answer. I definitely, what I have definitely learnt is that 6 weeks is the maximum recommended time between haircuts for me, and I'm into like week 10 now or something. So
yeah, I'm almost at like hat. I feel like doing these and like wearing a hat, but I'm just kind of going with it because everyone's going through hair things. We'll look back on these videos and have a good old laugh. So right, thank you so much, Ben, for answering all those questions, and you made some really, really good points there. So I'm just going to move on to the Q&A section here. So what's your favourite type of CGI, VR, AR animation, or just a traditional still?
I don't. Gosh, I'm a bit non-committal about some of these answers, aren't I? I don't have a favourite, because I think it's always about what's the right tool for the job. And if the job is to tell a story, it's about what's the story? If the story is about, I don't know, about a very clear story about, a story that is already written that you're trying to tell, maybe like an A to B kind of piece of film would do that. If it's, a story that you want other people to write or to get involved in, then maybe it's something more interactive or immersive, where people can manipulate things and create the story themselves. So I'm sort of sidestepping the question slightly, because it is for me totally about not choosing the tool before you know what you're trying to do with it. So it's always contextual to that, really. And the answer being in like the problem, if you like, the answer is always in the problem, in the question, in the brief.
Okay. Next question is, what are your strategies for client management, mission creep, change control, etc.?
Yeah, okay. Strategies for client management. I think first and foremost is get off to a good start. You don't just focus 90% of your energy on selling, to the client and then disappear or go into a different way of working. You've got to put out there exactly what the experience is going to be like, and wear your heart on your sleeve and treat it like a collaboration and build a relationship. That is the first and foremost thing to say about any client relationship is that R word. It's a relationship, and there will be ups and downs. They'll be being pulled probably themselves in lots of different directions, as you will, in trying to navigate what they want or what they need. And if you've got a good open conversation where it's not just about timelines and deliverables and it's about what's this for, what's the bigger prize, how, and getting on board with that, so your client's goals become your goals. That just creates a much richer environment. And then when you do hit some sticky patches, or you're a bit late, or there's some bad news, or it just creates a better place for those to go into. But it's really hard. I would say one thing I would say maybe as well, though, is don't try and over systemize it, or have documents and documents and documents and platforms coming out of your ears. Your clients probably haven't really got time to look at all those things. So just a human, here's where we are, here's where we'd like to be, here's where we're going next, here's what I need. Just really simple. Make it simple.
Okay. So next question is, how do you think RX, VR, AR industry will develop in the creative industries in the future?
I don't know. I think it's interesting with, platforms, if you like. I mean, we went through, you think of VR and AR and, as platforms, new mediums, really new ways of telling stories. Storytelling media have evolved over, a century or more now, and so I think there is clearly an opportunity there to be, by definition, much more immersive, but to recognize that it's still a human being in this technologically created environment, and you need to appeal to the human senses, not just appeal to the, not for it to just look real, for example, or to be convincing, but to move you in other ways. Because although it's in, say, use VR as an example, it's mainly a sight. Sight is your main sense. Don't forget the other senses that form a human experience. And I think those are often the barriers to a platform being properly adopted, I think. And certainly seen that with VR. A lot of the stuff in the way, it still feels really strange to a lot of people to put something on your face. It's an incredibly vulnerable position to be in. So it's like how you work with the human side, and that comes into story as well. Again, how you draw people into that world and immerse them in it in a holistic sense.
So last question here for you, Ben, is So with the decompressination of rendering with software like Corona, Lumion, Twinmotion, etc., do you think the key skills studios will look out for an artist will be the eye of lighting, composition and colour, the things that you feel and are inside you, as opposed to things that can be taught or learnt in a tutorial, almost like the old masters of painting?
Well, I think, you know, because at the end of the day, most of what we're talking about is a very, as I was saying earlier, really a very technically based art form. It's very hard to be the master of all those things. You know, it's a rare combination to be, you know, I guess what you might call a visionary, like creative artist at one end, and an incredibly, you know, technically fluent, technically driven person at the other end. You know, it's not impossible, but that's quite a stretch. So I would say, you know, certainly with regards to studios and teams, maybe having, you know, it's to use an old metaphor, it's about having like T-shaped people, so people who understand the importance of each of those things, but are an absolute expert in one of them. So, you know, if you're brilliant at, you know, the vision or the eye or the feeling, then just go all in on that and recognize that you can form a brilliant partner for someone who's, you know, wonderful at making that happen by programming this, you know, the ones and zeros on a render dialog box to get the thing that you're after. So yeah, I think working together and using complementary skills rather than maybe trying to be the jack of all trades, the jack of all parts of the artist, if you like, can be maybe a helpful framework as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, I think I'll wrap the session up. But again, thanks a lot, Ben, and thank you everyone that's joined us today as well. I hope you got a lot out of it. I know I did. If you enjoyed this at all and you'd like to share any information, please do. I'm just going to send a link now to Instagram and Twitter, so feel free to tag us in social media so we can share it and spread the word about these talks, and also add Ben as well on LinkedIn. Is there anything else you want to add, Ben?
No, not at all. Just that, really. Just, yeah, if anybody, you know, wants me to expand or otherwise, or is just confused about anything I've said, yeah, just give me a shout anytime.
Okay, awesome. Thanks a lot. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.
Bye, everybody. Cheers.